triangles with the same shape and size. This means all corresponding. Remember, corresponding means same position or same place. This means all corresponding parts, which would be the sides and angles, are congruent to each other. And so that's what it shows you in this next piece, the congruency statement. Now this is actually important because, well, we'll get into that. But if I look, angle A is congruent to angle D, angle B is congruent to angle E, angle C is congruent to angle F, and I know that because of the number of marks that are in those angles, right? The angle of 1 mark is congruent to the angle of 1 mark, the angle of 2 marks is congruent to the angle of 2 marks. And then that same thing is true with the letters, or not the letters, the sides. AB has 1 mark, DE has 1 mark, so those are the two that are the same, or 1 dash. Now, what is important about this is the way you write the congruency statement, or the way it is given to you, is the angles and the sides that are supposed to be congruent. So this is written as triangle ABC and triangle DEF, right? So it's always the first letter of the first triangle equals the first letter of the second triangle. So A and D have to be congruent. B and E have to be congruent. And then C and F have to be congruent. So it has to be written in order. It does not, the picture is not always in order, and you can tell by this because this triangle's kind of been flipped around to make DEF, right? And the same thing for the sides. Remember, a side is 2 letters. Well, the first 2 letters have to equal the side of the first 2 letters for the second triangle. So the side AB has to be the same as the side DE. AB has 1 mark, DE has 1 mark. BC has to equal the side EF. Both of them have 2 marks. And then AC and DF have to be the same. Both of those would have 3. Does that make sense?
So as long as their marks are the same thing?
Yes. This next part, the CPCTC, is really just common sense, but we're going to write it out so that you remember it. But all that stands for is that corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. So if we know 2 triangles are congruent, we know that every pair of corresponding parts are also congruent. And how I know that, or how you can use that without even looking at the picture, we're going to go through 1, 2, and 3 really quick together. But if I look, it gives me this congruent statement, and it says triangle JKL is congruent to triangle PQR. Without even looking at the picture, what angle is J have to be congruent to? Angle P. Angle K has to be congruent to which angle? Angle Q. Angle L has to be congruent to which angle? Angle R. Then the sides, if I use JK, what's the first 2 letters of the next triangle? If I use KL, would be QR. Now here's what becomes a little bit trickier. I have to use the first and last, and so that would be JL and PR. Now with these, it does matter the order you write it. You can't say JL and then say RP. Does that make sense? If you use the first and the last, it has to be the first and the last. Now down here it says write another valid congruency statement. All that means is I'm rewriting this, but I'm just putting it in a different order. And so you can put the first triangle in whichever order you want. So let's say I have triangle KJL. All I have to do now is make sure I write the second triangle in that same order, or it'd be counted wrong if you had that type of question. So if I say KJL, what order is the other triangle going to be in? QPR. Now you can make other orders like that, but as long as they're in the same order, they'll be right. And you'll be asked questions on, like, could this be a valid congruent statement? Or are these triangles congruent? And if it's not, it could be false. So actually, instead of doing number 2, I'll let you come back into that later. We're going to go to number 3. Because these are kind of the most important, because it makes you know which sides and stuff are congruent. Now number 3, it gives me a picture of 2 triangles. It says given triangle KPM is congruent to triangle AYC, complete each of the following statements. Anytime you have these pictures, label it first, then answer your question. So if it says angle K is first, what angle is it equal to? A, right? So I'm going to put one angle mark in K and one angle mark in A. And on your questions, whenever you start turning stuff in, if you don't do that, you won't get full credit. P is going to get 2. Which angle from the second triangle is going to get 2 arcs? And then M would get 3. And then C would get 3. So most time when you have 2 triangles, they're not going to be in the same orientation. One's going to be flipped or twisted or turned. Now I go to my letters. I have from K to P. So that would be 1. So from A to Y would be 1 dash. PM would be 2 dashes. YC, 2 dashes. And then KM and AC. So now all I have to do is answer my questions, but you have to be a little bit more careful because you have to make sure you put the letters in the right order. So A says KM is congruent to which side? Well, KM has 3 and this side has 3, but I have to make sure I put it in the right order. So if I look, KM goes from the angle with 1 mark to the angle with 3 marks, right? So I have to write that in the same order. So it would have to be AC. If you was to say CA, that would be counted wrong because that would be going from the angle with 3 marks to the angle with 1 mark. Does that make sense? So it has to go in the same order. So if I go down here and it says CY, so that's the side with 2 marks on it, but it has to go from the angle with 3 arcs to the angle with 2.
MP.
So that would be MP. And then what would PK be congruent to? Yep.
What's the first one? Is that
AC, yeah. The angles are easy. Angle Y has to be the same as angle P. Angle K has to be the same as angle A. Now, if it ever writes an angle with 3 letters, you have to do that in the same order as well. So this says angle ACY. ACY goes from angle with 1 mark to 3 marks to 2 marks. So I have to go 1 mark, 3 mark, 2 marks, right? That'd be angle KMP. It's basically the same thing as when I have to make these congruent statements. If I say triangle MPK, that would be 3 marks, 2 arcs, 1 arc. So what would be my other side, or my other triangle? CYA. Triangle YAC would be PK. Any questions so far?
This is actually pretty easy.
Alright. So before I turn you away to do work, go ahead and flip over to the back. And remember, we're just going to go down here and I'm going to set up all these for number 6 with you. And then I'll let you go and work on those. But remember, anytime I have congruent parts, you're going to set them equal, right? But the reason I say always mark your triangles first is because that will tell you which ones are equal and which ones aren't. So right here on number 6, it says it gives you that triangle UVW is congruent to triangle TSR. The very first thing you need to do is mark those. Now, if I'm just dealing with sides, you don't have to mark the angles and the sides. If you're just dealing with the angles, you can just mark the angles. Sometimes you have to do the angles and the sides. But right here, UV is my first 2 letters. So that gets 1 mark. What's going to get 1 mark on the other triangle? TS. VW is my second 2. That's going to get 2 marks. And so that would go with SR. And then my first and last would be UW. And then TR. So basically what I did right there was figure out which sides go with which, because I have to find X, Y, and Z. So basically that's 3 different problems. But if I'm using UV, if I'm using the X, that's 12X minus 7, which side does it go with? It goes with the one with 1 mark, right? So that'd be 12X minus 7 equals 53. And I would solve for X. Then if I'm looking for the Y, that's the 5Y minus 23 is on RS. That's 33, sorry. Which one would that equal from the first triangle? Which side over here has 2 marks on it? 57. I would solve that equation. Then for the Z, I have this 3Z plus 14.
Slide the paper over.
And what side does that equal from the other triangle?
50.
50. And you just solve those. So what you have for the rest of class is to just finish the rest of the stuff that is on this page. I will put it on Google Classroom